The promoter of the game and the owner of the tickets is the charity which applies for the lottery license, which is Rehab. And then Rehab Lotteries Limited manages that lottery on behalf of the charity. So under the license, the owner of the ticket, if you like, is the license holder, is the charity.
Sales to the public are all made by the newsagents.
Yes.
And 70% of the money used in that scheme, in those sales, is administered by the newsagents in terms of the payouts to the low-end winners. So only 30% is coming back to Rehab. I mean, if you look at it from a commercial point of view, and if I say supply, let's just say it's T-shirts to a sporting company, and I supply the T-shirts at €1 a piece, and they sell them for €10 a piece, I'm not going back to my board of directors or my shareholders and telling them that my sales in the year are what the sports companies sold the T-shirts for. I'm telling them it's what I sold the T-shirts for to the sports companies. This is the same arrangement here with the newsagents.
I'm not sure of the point you're making, but in our invoice, we would invoice for the €100, right? And from that, you know, we take off the commission, we take off the allowance for the low-end prizes. So they are our sales. I mean, they are, and we have to, you know, we have to account for every ticket we issue. So it's important we know where every ticket is. And that's the way we operate it. But in effect, you're right that the only real money we actually get back is is net of the prizes, net of the commission.
Essentially, then, when someone buys one of these scratch cards in the newsagents, they're not giving any money to Rehab at all.
Well, at the moment, they're given quite a small amount.
It's tiny. Yeah. It's a fraction.
But as I say, that's a factor of the sales having declined very significantly because we haven't been able to compete. And you know,
Is there anything on the scratch card that says that to the person who's purchasing it, that the money?
No, it's because our promise to the member of the public is they're not making a donation. That they're buying a lottery ticket. They're buying a chance to win. If somebody wants to give €1 to Rehab, you know, we have our collection box on the counter and they can put their euro in here and we get the full €100. This is not the same. When you spend €1 on this, the €1, and I think generally speaking the public doesn't like it, you know, it's a chance to win a prize.
The purpose of the scheme, though, as far as Rehab runs it, is not to make money because it doesn't make money from it. The purpose of the scheme as you run it is to get money from the government.
No, that's not true. We are incredibly focused and always have been on maximising the return of our scratch cards. This was a cracking business for us for many, many years when we were doing sales of up to 10 million a year, which was bringing in almost 3 million in profit. And right through the years, we've had a good business. It's just now because, and we've stripped back the numbers employed in the company from 36 to 11 or 10 now. And we need a basic amount of infrastructure there to support it, and that has cost. Unfortunately, when you pay the prizes, you pay the commission, you pay the other things, there's very little left. And we accept that, and we're unhappy with it. And we would like it to be better. And we hope there'll be better days ahead. And we'll stick in there hoping that. But we're still in the totality. If you take the two products which we're selling into those shops, Deputy Murphy, the scratch cards and the radio bingo both go into the same type of shops. In their totality, in the year to which the Minister referred, they're bringing in 560,000 net, which is wonderful income for us. Now, we prefer that to be 1 million or 2 million, and we would do that. And, you know, we're of the view that if there was fairness in the market in terms of no cap on the prizes, if we could offer similar prizes, we would have at least 10–15% of the market, which would be turnover of about 75–100 million, which would bring us in about 30 million in profit.
If the
So
cap is not lifted, though,
the Charitable Lotteries Fund for the government is a great deal because they're spending a few million on it, but in return they're getting a competition-free market. And if I could just, for the benefit of the committee, just as an example in other jurisdictions, and there are loads of examples in Europe of other markets where we don't have the existence of such an unfair situation. If you take Spain, people will be familiar going on Spain on holidays to the on-sale lottery, which is huge. But I might just, as an example, take the case of Holland.
Ms. Maguire, sorry, I don't want to get into the dispute that you're having with the department in relation to the cap and the lifting of it.
Yeah,
okay. Would it be fair to say that if the cap is not lifted, you will not be able to continue to run the scratch card scheme?
Well, you know, the matter is before the courts at the moment. So we have two options. We have a government taking a position that what is going on is unfair, that it's discriminating, that we have two suppliers to the market where one supplier has their hands tied behind their back and can't offer a comparative product, and we will address that, or else the courts will take that view, or else, you know, we're continually looking for other ways of developing our scratch card business through.
Well, under the scheme as it operates currently, it's in your interest to have a high volume of sales because that will then increase the amount of funding you get from the department.
Well, to a limit, Deputy.
To a limit, obviously, in terms of the fund that's available.
You see, we're such the bigger player that if our sales increase dramatically, the overall market increases correspondingly. So our share within the market doesn't change very much.
The money you receive from the Department of Justice, though, it goes into the total rehab pot. It's not going to a particular, it's not earmarked for, or it's not designated to a particular frontline service. It goes into general rehab.
It is, yes.
What service is that?
Every single year since the start of the compensation fund in 1996-97, we have provided the department with an annual report in the following year's application saying how the monies were applied.
We apply to administrative costs?
No.
You've seen
That's a condition of the scheme.
But you've seen the audit from 2012 from the Department of Justice, which claimed that money was.
Well, there were some queries in regard to, in fairness to the Department of Justice, in the preceding years up to that audit, there was a one-line, there wasn't even a one-line, there was a one-word description of what administration costs were. There was no clarification on that. And in fairness to the Department of Justice, following on the audit in 2010, in the subsequent applications which we have complied with, they provided a more fulsome definition of what they understand to be administration costs. And we have complied with all of that. And
it occurred to you that information technology costs might be admin costs.
But information technology is central to what we do in providing services and training people through NLN, for example, in computer skills or whatever, or the way we communicate with people, or
admin costs. I mean, is it good enough to say that they didn't define admin, so we didn't know what it was?
Well, as far as we were concerned, in interpreting the spirit of what was in the application prior to the audit referred, we gave the department each year full details of what we were spending the money on. Prior to 2010, so it was running from 1996 to 2010, year in, year out, we sent in what the money was been spent on, and we had no queries. So, you know, we had assumed that whatever our interpretation of what was not admin was correct, and all the amounts were paid in full without any query.
The problem with the audit that was done by Justice in 2012, you don't accept it.
There were some queries.
But you didn't respond to it.
We did.
Well, I mean, I've seen, and maybe Justice wants to come in on this, but Ms. Kearns, you responded to it in a letter. I can find it here, sorry. Is that the response? When you talk about giving a response, that is the response, because as far as Justice is concerned, in respect of the audit report, it should be noted that it was not possible to fully conclude the internal audit process as the management response to the audit findings and recommendations sought from Rehab as a routine element of the audit process was not received.
May I come in on that? When we got that audit report, in our view, the audit was done as if this was a grant aid scheme and not a compensation scheme. And in my letter, Deputy, you will see that we asked for a meeting to progress this.
Yeah.
Now, we had quite a number of contacts with the Department of Justice to get that meeting established and to get that meeting, and we never got it. So it's not a case...
Department of Justice about that?
In relation to the question of cooperation with the audit.
Why the meeting wasn't facilitated, that was Karen was seeking.
The audit took place in 2012 as indicated, and then the audit was completed and the findings were outlined. And at that point, the decision was taken that in order, as I indicated earlier, because of the review of our expenditure, and that was simply one line of the expenditure, and given what we had identified in relation to concerns about, as I said, the audit raised costs, or raised a concern that the costs associated with the Rehab lottery were very high, and the issues you've mentioned there about percentages, etc. So when the audit was completed, and I have to, I should point out that there was full cooperation with Rehab during the course of the conduct of that audit. The decision was then taken in late 2012 that we would move to reduce the amount of money available for the Charitable Lotteries Fund over the next period of time.
I think the question Deputy Murphy is asking is why didn't you arrange the meeting with Rehab?
Well, the reason...
They asked for a meeting. The correspondence is there. It would seem as if they were stuck on a particular query in relation to an audit. They raised the question of a meeting with your department. Why didn't you meet them?
Well, as I indicated at that stage, the process where the Minister had decided the scheme would be wound down.
Why didn't you meet them? Did you write and say, sorry, Ms. Kearns, the meeting, or the meeting won't happen because the scheme...
As far as I'm aware, we didn't write down at that.
Wouldn't that be just to be courteous? You might have acknowledged it.
Well, I suppose there was no... I don't think there were any issues... I don't think there were any issues in relation to the factual elements of what was in the audit. I don't think there was any... There was
a reasonable request from Rehab to meet with them in relation to this. And as I understand it now from Deputy Murphy's question, there was no response from your department.
That's correct.
That's the way you do business.
In that instance, there was no meeting arranged.
Just ignore them.
The decision was taken at that stage.
But did you communicate that decision to Ms. Kearns? Did you explain it and then say, and we can't meet?
No.
No.
Thank you, Chair. There was no dispute on the findings from the internal audit report between yourselves and Rehab.
I don't think there was any. I don't think there were any factual issues raised. If there were.
Do you agree?
There were a number of issues that we needed to address in relation to the findings. But what we wanted to do was sit down with the department and go through this report line by line to deal with the issues and the overall context of how the department saw the scheme. In other words, it wasn't a grant scheme. It was a compensation scheme, and that's where issues broke down.
I find interesting actually because when you look at the letter that you wrote to Justice on the 23rd of August 2012, you make that point very forcefully. This is a compensatory scheme that you receive because competition in the market's being altered by government legislation. But when you look at something like the document from the Department of Finance in 2004, I mean, they do talk about it as a grant scheme. And they do talk about it being provided in accordance with the terms of the scheme. Whereas in your letter, sorry, Mr. McGuire, in your letter, Ms. Kearns, to Justice, you say it is not an exchequer grant to organisations to provide services, but it is a grant scheme, according to Finance. And you say it's not appropriate for the Department of Justice to seek to influence the operations of a private body by insisting that its earned income be applied to certain areas. When you make that point to Justice, are you saying that you cannot tell us whether we can or not spend this money on administrative services or IT procurement or bank interest fees or professional fees or advertising as you had been spending the money prior to that point in time?
Can I make 2 points on that? We have always, and John may wish to come in on this, we have always considered this as a scheme to compensate charity lotteries. The point I was making there is that it is not like a normal grant scheme that is advertised and organisations apply for grant aid through the scheme. This scheme is, if as John said earlier on, if we had if the cap was scrapped on the charitable lotteries, we would be in a much better position to increase our income, which would be our independent income, into the Rehab group. Instead of that, in 1996, following a lot of lobbying by not only us, by the way, we're not the only charity lottery, the decision was taken and the agreement was reached between the charity lotteries and the government that a charity lottery fund be established to support that. The issue for us, for the first time, this audit was auditing that scheme as if it was a grant and aid scheme, as if it was a grant scheme for specific purposes. This scheme was never for that. What we supplied into the Department of Finance and indeed into the Department of Justice was a wide list of activities that we had engaged in. And in fact, as I said earlier on, they could choose what activities or of areas of expend that they felt that was compatible with the fund. But we would have spent this funding. So it wasn't a grant scheme. It wasn't a scheme that the government put up and said that Rehab could apply for particular issues. It was a far more freer environment in relation to the organisation being able to apply it to certain areas.
But not a really free environment. I mean, I accept that it's a compensatory scheme,
yes.
But it's a grant given by the department with conditions. Do you accept that?
It was, up until then, there was, it could not be spent, nor did we spend. It could not be spent on a very broad administrative purpose definition up until then.
Too broad?
I wouldn't say it was. The deciding, the authority who decided whether our submissions were compliant or not was the Department of Finance at the time and the Department of Justice, not us. And we over-submitted insofar as we provided an awful lot more activities in relation to our application than what the value of the scheme was worth.
Mm-hmm. I mean, like if you look at the document from 2004 from the Department of Finance, which you brought into us, the conditions of the scheme stipulate that any funding provided under the scheme must be spent on the charitable activities of the organisation and cannot be used for administrative purposes. And I mean, you say it's too broad, or very, sorry, not using say too broad, I beg your pardon, a very broad interpretation of administrative because it wasn't actually laid out in the document. But it's quite clear that it can't be used for admin. But
what we submitted and the areas of activity that we identified that this scheme was spent on were quite a broad area of activity. And at no time when we were submitting for this scheme were we told that any of the areas that we submitted on were non-compliant. We've never got any feedback, ever, in relation to our submission. But we have got paid. So we assume then, yes,
previously, yeah.
and justice, and justice. And we assume then that we've more than supplied the relevant information and areas to the departments. We've never had feedback on that.
To be clear on this, your view was that the money was spent appropriately, even within the terms of what constitutes administrative costs. And the first time that was flagged with you was with the internal audit report in 2012 from Justice, from which you then wrote back to Justice saying, we have a different view of what you're saying and we'd like to sit down with you.
But we never got that opportunity to progress that further.
Thank you. Thank you. Just to go back to Justice on this point, I mean, was it your view that because you were winding down the scheme that it was pointless to complete the audit process?
No, I mean, There were no disputes about the factual element of what was in the audit. The scheme was then being wound down, and quite shortly after the letter issued informing not just Rehab but everyone else that we were moving to wind down the scheme, litigation commenced very shortly after that. So once the litigation commenced, there was no question of having a meeting. But there was
Litigation commenced, sorry.
I think it was November 2012.
Request for the meeting came in a letter from Rehab in August 2012.
The end of August 2012, yeah.
Okay. And then once litigation was initiated, you felt that you could not sit down and meet with them.
No, we couldn't at that stage.
But you didn't communicate that to Rehab.
There may have been telephone contact, but I don't think there was anything put in writing, other than the October letter that would have informed them of the fact that we were winding the scheme down.
October letter is what prompted then the litigation. When Rehab were informed that the scheme was being wound down, they decided they needed to fight this.
Yeah.
Okay.
They were invited to make a submission. The October letter informing them that the scheme was being wound down contained a paragraph in it, or a sentence in it, that invited them to make a submission at that point in relation to that matter.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Chair.